what we have done till now is we set the rendering part to deferred. We checked if the SDR is on or not, and also we set the color space to linear from gamma. So these are a few small settings you do which give small to medium improvements to your game. Now if you want to improve this even further, then you use post-processing. So let's go to Window, select the package manager, and this window opens up. Then go to all packages, and you'll see this list of packages. So basically Unity provides a number of packages which are like small modules which you can add to your game. So in these packages, let's look for post-processing. Yeah, it's right there. So this is the post-processing package. So you might have to download this, but if you have it downloaded, you can just click on install. It takes like a minute to do it. Yeah, that's done. Now the post-processing has been installed. So to use the post-processing, what you do is you go to the hierarchy, go to 3D object and select post-processing volume. Let's create a game object called the post-processing volume. Now let's reset its transform. So it is right there. So you can see this is like a box, a small box. But what this box does, the post-processing that you will apply will only be applied inside this small box, but we don't want that. We want the post-processing to apply on the entire scene. So we set is global to true, and now the post-processing will apply in the entire scene. There might be some cases where you want the post-processing to apply to only some regions. Maybe if you have outdoor scene and an indoor scene, and so you want a different kind of post-processing inside and different outside. So in that cases, you might use this box, and you can set the shape of the box using this edit collider, and that's how you localize the post-processing if you want different type of post-processing in different areas. Now so we have created this post-processing volume. Let's go to our main camera, add component, search for post-processing. So if you search post, there's this post-processing layer. It's created. Let's select it, and a component gets added to our camera called the post-processing layer. In the layers, we have to set the layer to everything, so that the post-processing gets applied to every single thing. Okay, now let's go back to our post-processing volume, and here you can see there's something called a profile, and there is none right now. We need to create a profile. Let's click on new, and Unity will create a profile. If you click on this profile, it will take you to the profile. So this icon you can see is the icon of a post-processing profile. Now what is the post-processing profile? So let's click on this. So as you can see right now, it's empty and it says no override set on this volume. So basically this profile is how you set your parameters or your settings of the post-processing. So let's try to add an effect. So let's click on add effect, Unity. So firstly, what I like to do is select color grading, and if I expand this is the color grading settings. So color grading is basically if you have done video editing or photo editing. So it basically is a way to remap the color of your scene to different colors. So basically if you want to add some kind of effects or change the color slightly and make any adjustment, you use color grading. So let's set the mode, select mode, and it is set at high definition range. Let's select this mode, this tone mapping mode, set this to A6. So what is A6 is it's a pre-made tone mapper. So it basically is a way of adjusting the colors of your scene, and this comes built in with Unity. A6 is, as far as I know, actually used in movies and other things, and you can also use this in your game. There are other settings like neutral and custom. So custom means you can set your own tone mapper, but let's just set it to A6. Most of the time you will be using A6, and it is actually very good tone mapper. Now that has been done. So let's see what other things are there in this tone mapper. So if we select temperature, by setting the temperature, you can change the color, the tint of your image. It's like so this is used for white balance. So if you know about white balance, you basically want in your scene to that white colors, something which should actually appear to be white, should appear white in your scene, but sometimes due to various reasons it might not be the case. So you adjust this temperature and this tint to make sure that whatever you want, the whites of your screen do appear white. So you can use this tone mapper to do that. Right now I don't want to use it, so let's just deselect it. Now there's this post exposure. So if you want to increase the exposure of your screen, make it more bright, you can use this. So let's just set it to 0.25. There's also this color filter. So you can set it to any color, and basically that the entire scene will take that color. So I don't want to use it, so let's not use it right now. Then there's the hue shift. You can shift the hues of your image. So again, if you want to, I mean, most of the time, if you're making a natural scene or a realistic scene, you won't use this, but there might be cases where you will use this, and this can be used to create, a very different kind of scene. I mean, more fantasy environment maybe. Now the saturation is the saturation of the colors of your scene. So again, if you have done photo editing or anything like that, you would recognize these names. So let me just set this to 1. So if I increase this saturation, the colors become more saturated, more bright. And if I reduce this, the screen becomes black and white. So let's just set this to 15 maybe. And now let's go. Now there's the contrast. Now the contrast as the name suggests, the contrast of your scene. So if I reduce this, the contrast goes very low, and the scene becomes gray. If I increase this, the contrast increases by a lot. So let's just set this to some value like 20. Now there are these other things like channel mixer, and most of the time you will not be using these, but so for example, if I go to red and select red, I can change this slider to set the amount of red which is used in red channel. So I can even mix two colors, for example blue, and this is mostly used to give different kinds of effects. So this totally depends on your artistic, this is less of a technology and more of an art. So this just totally depends on how you want your scene to look. I'm just gonna not use this for right now. Then there is this trackballs. So again, these are settings which you can use to change the colors of your scene. Again, just depends on how you want your scene to look. There's no fixed way of how you should do this. So I'm not going to use it right now. Now there's also this grading curves, very useful tool. So for example, but again, it depends on how you want your scene to look, but it can do a lot of things. So for example, if I select this hue versus hue and click on override, then double click on the center of the line, this will create a small square on that. Then create somewhere else as well, creates another square. Now I can lift this square, and what this will do is create this curve. So this curve is basically a function which takes a hue and gives you another hue. So again, this can be used to create very different kinds of scenes, very affect the how you want your scene to look like, different colors, and this totally depends on how you want your scene to look, and there's not much to tell here. There are other things like hue versus saturation, saturation versus saturation, and luminance versus saturation. All of this can give you various kinds of effects. So you can just play around with this and get the perfect look you want. So let's just deselect override because I don't want this effect to be there. So that was color grading. So color grading is usually the first thing you do when you are setting up your scene, applying post-processing. So now let's move ahead. Let's deselect it. Again, add effect. Now there's this effect called Ambient Occlusion. Now a very useful effect. So let's just see what it does. So let's select mode and select the intensity, set it to something. So can you see what it is doing? Let me just show you. So if I go here and if I reduce the intensity to 0, you can see that the corners right now, they don't have much shadow in there. But if I increase this, those corners become dark. This ambient occlusion, this is what it does. So it makes any corners or any such things dark so as to add an effect of shadow, because in real life also the corners and such places are usually slightly darker. So this is one of the most useful effects, and also gives very good look. And so the intensity just sets how much you want. So if I set this to very high, the entire thing becomes black, which is not desired. So usually set this to around 1 or slightly less than 1. The thickness modifier is how thick you want your shadows to be. So again, just set this to 1, not needed to play with it. And the color, so the color is which color you want your shadows to be. So usually I set this to black because shadows are black. And this ambient only, what this does is if you set this, it will only affect the light which is the ambient light, but if something is lit by the real-time lights, it will not work with that, it will not affect it. But usually even if you leave it with ambient only, it works properly. So so that was ambient occlusion. And you can see if I remove ambient occlusion, the scene becomes much less realistic, it basically adds a lots of depth to the scene, and those places they look much darker, and that gives a better effect. Now let's go to the next one. There's this auto exposure. So what this does is, actually it is not usable right now in this scene. What this will do is, imagine if you are moving from a dark room to a brighter room. For a few seconds, your entire vision goes very bright because your eyes are not used to that brightness. So you can simulate that in Unity as well. So you can use this if you add auto exposure. Then if your character walks from a darker place to a brighter place, or a brighter place to a darker place, the exposure of the scene will adjust according to that to give that kind of effect. So right now we are not using this tool, so let's remove it. The next thing is bloom. So this is a very popular one, and a lot of people use it and sometimes overuse it. So what bloom is, it adds glow to the objects, to places of your scene. So if something is very bright, it starts to glow if we are using bloom. So let's set the intensity. If I increase the intensity, you can see not much is happening because there are no very bright things in our scene right now. If I go to the threshold, I can set how bright something has to be to start to glow. If I reduce this, you can see almost the entire scene kind of starts to glow. On the other hand, if I increase this, it goes back to its normal, to how it normally was. So this is what bloom does. Let me just, to show this, let's increase the intensity of our directional light to 2. Okay, that's maybe a little too much. Adjust it to 1.7. Yeah, now let's go back to post-processing. Yeah, so right now you can see that this part, since it's reflecting light from the sun, it appears it is very bright, and due to this bloom, it is starting to glow. If I remove the bloom, you can see it is not glowing, but it is still very bright. But if I use bloom, it starts to glow. So this is what bloom is used for, to make things glow. And a lot of times people overuse this. They add too much bloom, which does not look that good. So so keep that in mind. Other than that, it's very useful if you want to add glow to your scene. So let's go to the next one. Before that, so these other things are usually just settings which you use to make some other changes to your bloom, but most of the time these two settings are what you will use, so we'll not cover this. So now let's go to next one. So we covered bloom. Now let's go to chromatic aberration. So if you increase the intensity, you can see the corner of your screen, it appears as if they are getting distorted. The colors are separating. This is basically used to give an effect of a lens. So if you have used a lens, if you have seen through a lens, the corners or the edges of the lens of the image that you're seeing in the lens are usually distorted. The colors are separated from each other, and so to simulate that similar effect in our games, we can use this chromatic aberration. So if you are creating maybe a scene where you are looking through a telescope or something, you can use this. So right now I don't want to use this in my scene, so let's remove it. So now the next thing is, so we already did color grading, so let's go with depth of field. So let me just first position the camera to a different place. Good. So depth of field, so what it does, it gives a blur effect to things which are out of focus. So the first setting is the focal distance, second is aperture, and the focal length. It only affects your main camera, the game view, and it does not affect the scene view. Right? So let me just try to position the game view camera into a similar position. So let's have the main camera. Now if we enable depth of field, you can see the scene has become very blurry, and if we adjust the settings, we can change the amount of the type of blur. Let's set this to 5 meters. Reduce the aperture. So as you can see, that single cross in between is now in focus, while every other thing is getting out of focus. So if you want to get this kind of effect, that is what depth of field does. So again, I'm not using this in my scene, so let's remove it. Now there's something called grain. So grain is basically used to add a kind of a grain. So as you can see, if I increase this, the image has become very noisy. So this is what grain is used for. Again, if you want to achieve certain kinds of effect, you can use grain, but right now it's not usable in our scene. Let's remove it. Next thing is lens distortion. Now it is similar to the chromatic aberration part. What it does is it distorts the scene slightly. So maybe you want to get an effect of how a lens distorts something. So that if that is the case, you can use this lens distortion. So you can adjust this to get different kinds of effects. Again, not very useful in general cases, so let's remove it. So next thing is called motion blur. Now motion blur, as the name suggests, blurs the motion. So if any object is moving, or if the camera is moving, it blurs the moving objects in your scene. So again, it's very simple. So these settings basically just impact how much or which type of motion blur is there. But to see the motion blur, we will have to have a moving scene, but there's nothing in a scene which moves, so let's just remove it because it's not usable right now. Now the next thing is screen space reflection. Yeah, so it is this thing is slightly like ambient occlusion in that it adds realism to your scene. So, and again, quite useful. So its effect is not very visible most of the time, but what it does, it adds kind of a reflection to some of the objects. Just 1 minute. So it adds a very subtle reflection on parts of your scene, but I'm not sure. So if you look at the scene right now, if I enable this, there's kind of a reflection in the central part, but nothing in the outer edges. If I remove this, the entire thing is reflecting, which is not very, which does not look very good. But if I enable this, only some part of it will reflect based on from which direction you are looking at. So this is the type of thing which you can use to, which adds very subtle effect, but can add to the realism of your scene. Now, yeah, so this was screen space reflection. Again, these are the settings which are used to affect it. Now the next type is, yeah, so next is Vignette. You might have heard about this if you have done image editing. So it does a very simple thing, and that is, it adds this black color, or it darkens the edges of your scene. So if you want that kind of effect, you can use this to darken the edges of your screen. You can actually set the color of what color your edges will become. So if I set this to red, the edges have become red, and I can set this to any color I like. You just set this to black, and these are the settings which you can use to affect it. Again, very self-explanatory. Yeah, so this is what these are all the effects of the post-processing, and you can use this to enhance the quality of your scene once you have made it. So this is what it does. Actually, if you want to see the combined effect of the post-processing, if I remove is global, the post-processing effect is removed. As you can see, the scene now looks very less, I mean, it does not look as good as it previously was. So if I enable post-processing, it just looks much more better because there's more depth and other things. So yeah, so that was post-processing, very useful, and always remember to use it whenever you're building a scene. Mostly post-processing is used at the end of the project, once you have made everything, and then you try to adjust the look of your scene. So that's when you use post-processing.